understand and see ourselves through the world's eyes, then we are defined and limited by how the world perceives. Now, this is not new. The prophets of the Hebrew Scriptures knew it, and so they cried out against those in the world who twisted the facts to fit their own desires and prejudices. And so you have words like this coming from Isaiah: "Woe to you who call evil good and good evil." Spin doctors are not a modern invention of the current political authorities. It's been around as long as civilization has been around, as those in power try to spin the description of the world so that it benefits those in power. In Jesus' culture, illness and sinfulness were linked together. And the disciples reflect that conventional world knowledge, that prejudice and stereotyping of their day. And we see it in John's Gospel when they ask Jesus about a blind man. They come to Jesus and say, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus, rejecting the premise of the world, says that neither he nor his parents sinned. And he heals the man's sight. We continue to stereotype. It is as current as today's newspaper headlines, such as the Trayvon Martin shooting, or as current as a legislative issue before our nation, that of immigration. We say people are poor because they're lazy, or they are poor because they have mismanaged their resources, or because they have squandered opportunities, or because, in the most blatantly evil definitions of guilt, because they are black or female or homosexual or members of whatever subhuman group, whatever part of humanity the powerful choose to define as being subhuman and sinful. Paralysis, hunger, homelessness, and early death are, according to the rich and the powerful, the direct consequences of the poor and powerless having sinned in one way or another. According to them, those are judgments of God upon their life. And we are blinded to the systemic and economic violence caused by making corporate profits instead of the concern for the poor to be the highest good in our land. We demonize the poor and we glorify the rich and the powerful. Surely we stand well in that tradition of calling evil good and good evil. Joan Chittister says that it is a pathetic moment in the history of the human condition when the outside world tells us who and what we are. And then we start to believe it ourselves. When we allow the world to define us, we imprison ourselves and we become what the world wants us to become, instead of what God has called us to be. Stereotyping is wrong. And the worst part of it is that we begin to believe it. And as we begin to believe it, we imprison ourselves by buying into that worldview. Perhaps the best example in our culture is that of ageism. So it might be good for us to begin today by looking at the world. Generally speaking, the world sees the senior years through dark-colored lenses. They see aging as being primarily a time of loss of mobility, of health, of independence, of dignity, and of loved ones. And while such losses are all true, the reality is that they represent only a tiny, tiny fraction of our time in our senior years. Not to downplay those major life changes, they are significant. And they all can lead to periods of depression. And that is quite normal. But when this is the dominant image of aging, and for many the only image of aging that is projected, it can lead to a loss of hope. And losing hope is not normal. When you only focus on the negative, you get a very lopsided view. And when society echoes that lopsided view, it tends to become the dominant mode of seeing. So in our culture, old age is generally considered to be an age of decline and of growing senility. Once you attach the word retired to your profession, it is assumed that you no longer add value to our society. All of your years of experience and all of your learning are devalued simply because you are no longer gainfully employed and paid for what you know and what you did. Your time, in essence, once retired, adds nothing to the GNP, and so, therefore, you are discounted. The dominant portrayal of elderly people in advertising, in print, and in the film and TV medium is that the elderly are frail, dysfunctional, and forgetful. And the list goes on and on and on. The list of assumptions about aging is long and disturbing, but guess what? All of those negative images do not stand up to careful scrutiny. Older adults are depicted as being feeble and frail, but for years now, researchers have known that only 5% of those over 65 are in special care institutions. And 80% of the rest of the older population have no limitations in managing the rigors of daily living. Just last week, if you were paying attention to the V, you would have seen 2 major studies released in Europe that say dementia is beginning to retreat. Yes, it's true that more older people than younger ones have chronic illnesses. But it's also true that they have fewer acute illnesses than younger ones. They also have fewer injuries in the home and fewer accidents on the highway. And with the new emphasis on gerontology, these rates are continuing to decline as well. Older adults are depicted as forgetful and incapable of learning new things. And yet scientists have discovered that older people, while not as quick computationally as younger people, do think just as well as the young. They just think differently. They think with more depth, with more reflection, with more philosophical awareness, because of their years of experience. Neurological research now confirms that old brains are indeed physically smaller than young ones, but they are no less intellectually competent than young ones. And in some ways, in terms of reflection and in terms of creativity, they are even better. if for no other reason than they have an awful lot of experience to add to their intellectual acuity. But not only are older adults marginalized and discounted as unproductive and frail, they are also treated as a class to be exploited. Now you are not valued for your intelligence and wisdom, but rather you are perceived as a valuable market niche to be exploited. You become coveted not for what you know and how you might enrich the world, but how you might enrich corporate profits. Driven by the cultural bias toward youth, aging has become an issue to exploit. The message that we are given is that any signs of aging are bad, and the desire to preserve a youthful look is good. This bias against aging has resulted in a multi-billion-dollar industry in covering up the natural process of life. The world market for anti-aging products was projected to reach $115.5 billion a year by the year 2010. And with the aging baby boomer population, that is expected to continue to increase by 50% over the next decade. The world of advertising caters to this forever young obsession. And close behind that is the world of leisure and travel. The cruise industry alone has grown from 2.7 million passengers in the year 1990 to a projected 25 million passengers per year by 2015. The aging population is something to be exploited but not embraced. And it's not that those issues are inherently evil, but one has to ask oneself, in a world in which there are so many needs, surely the people who are to be a light to the nations can find a more balanced way of using their time and their resources. Ageism is a lie.